sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Hey, deep divers, welcome back. You ready for another deep dive today?
Always ready. Let's get into it.
Cool. So look, today we're looking at, well, this is something that's been happening in the podcast world.
Yeah.
That we thought was like really fascinating. So basically, we're going to be digging into the podcast charts today.
Okay.
And talking about like who's at the top, you know?
Sure.
And I think people are going to be surprised to see who's actually taken that #1 spot recently.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty wild. I was pretty surprised to see, to see who ended up at the top of the charts.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically what we've seen is that the MeidasTouch podcast, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of them, they're hosted by the Mycelis brothers.
Right.
They actually overtook the Joe Rogan Experiences as the #1 podcast.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really big deal, right? Like, Rogan has been at the top of the charts for so long.
Yeah, I mean,
it's kind of crazy to see that change, you know?
like, is this the changing of the guard? Are we going to see, like, is this a trend?
Right. Like, is this like a blip, or is this the beginning of like a whole new era
Totally.
of podcasting?
Okay, so I think to start, let's actually like dive into like the data behind this, right?
Okay, yeah, sure.
We got some numbers from Podscribe.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying that MeidasTouch had a 110% jump in like downloads and listens.
Wow.
Reaching 58.1 million downloads and views across all the different platforms.
That's a lot.
I know, it's huge. And Rogan, his numbers dipped 32% all the way down to 48 million.
Huh.
Still a lot.
Yeah, I mean, 48 million is nothing to sneeze at, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, still huge. But that is a crazy, crazy shift.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what would be good is like, you know, for people who maybe aren't as familiar with the podcast landscape,
Yeah.
like how are these numbers determined? How do we get to this place?
Well, okay, so it's actually a combination of factors, right? So like first and foremost, we're looking at the raw numbers like downloads, listens, you know,
Yeah.
across all the different platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that stuff. But it's not just about like the pure number of listens, it's also about engagement.
Okay.
So are people leaving reviews? Are they sharing it on social media? Are they talking about, so there's like a whole algorithm that takes all of that into account.
So it's not just like, you know, a pure numbers game. It's like, how much are people actually vibing with it? And like, how are they?
Exactly. It's like, yeah, are people interacting with it?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. That's interesting. So it's like there's like a much more complex picture.
It's a whole ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a whole ecosystem. I like that. All right, well, now that we've got a little bit of a lay of the land.
Exactly.
Let's talk about like who these Mycelis brothers are.
Okay, so the thing about the Mycelis brothers, right, is they're not like newcomers to success. You know what I mean? Like they've all had pretty impressive careers before they even started this podcast.
Okay.
So like you got Ben Mycelis, he was Colin Kaepernick's lead lawyer.
Oh, wow.
And he's also a co-owner of Los Angeles Magazine.
Okay.
You've got Brett Mycelis. He won 2 Emmys for video editing on the Ellen DeGeneres show.
No way.
Yeah, and then Jordan Mycelis was a like top advertising executive in New York.
I mean, talk about like a powerhouse trio. Like,
Yeah, it's a pretty impressive resume, right?
yeah, I'm kind of like blown away right now. Like, no wonder they're crushing it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that really informs like their podcast, you know? It's not just like 3 random guys talking about politics.
Yeah, no.
You know, they have like experience.
Right.
They have like this deep understanding of like different fields.
Totally.
And I think that really comes across.
Okay. So do you see like specifically like how those backgrounds show up in the content itself? Like,
Yeah, for sure. So like Ben's legal background, I think, really informs like their focus on accountability,
okay.
especially when it comes to their criticism of Trump.
Okay.
You know, it's very like direct,
Right.
evidence-based, you know.
Yeah.
And then like Brett's entertainment background, I think, like explains the banter.
The energy?
Yeah, like the fast-paced, energy of the show.
Right.
It makes it like really entertaining to listen to, even when they're talking about like complex political stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I was reading their Apple Podcast description.
Okay.
And they talk about their how they have hilarious brother banter and then they combine that with on the support of democracy.
Yeah, it's quite a mix, right?
It's a really interesting mix. Like
Okay.
and speaking of an unfilm, I mean, they're known for their strong stance against Trump, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, they do not they don't hold back at all.
They don't mince words, like at all.
No, they let you know exactly how they feel.
Yeah. You know, what I thought was really interesting is like, we were thinking back to Trump's rise to power.
Yeah.
And how he made, like, he was on all these podcasts, right? He was on Joe Rogan's podcast. He was on Full Send. He was on Bussin' with the Boys.
Yeah, he did a lot of podcasts.
Like a lot of right-leaning podcasts.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, like, is there a connection, right, between podcast appearances and like political influence?
It's a really interesting question, right?
Yeah.
Because like we're seeing, you had Trump, who was on a lot of these right-leaning podcasts, and then, he obviously ended up winning the presidency.
Yeah.
So is this like, are we seeing a similar thing now with,
Like on the other side?
yeah, on the other side with MeidasTouch, like,
yeah.
Is this going to be a thing where we start seeing more and more politicians or political figures using podcasts as like a platform?
As a launch pad?
Yeah, as a launch pad to gain influence.
That's a really good question. And like, I don't know if we have the answer to that yet.
No, I mean, it's way too early to tell.
But it's definitely something to think about.
For sure, for sure.
We have a clip here of Ben Meiselas from a recent MeidasTouch episode.
Okay.
And I want to play this because he's really going at Trump in this one.
Okay.
So let's hear this. So there you have it. I mean, what do you think? What stands out to you in that clip, like in terms of his tone?
I mean, it's very direct, right?
Yeah.
Like almost prosecutorial, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Given Ben's background.
Totally.
He's not like pulling any punches.
No.
And I think that, that kind of straightforwardness,
Right.
It can be really appealing to listeners.
Yeah.
Especially listeners who are already like aligned with his view.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So it's almost like, they're giving the people what they want in a way. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
It's like, and maybe that's a part of their success too. It's like they're not afraid to take a stance.
Yeah, and I think people are like, there's so much like kind of wishy-washy.
You have milquetoast.
Yeah, exactly.
Like middle of the road kind of stuff, and people are kind of tired of that.
I think so. I think people are looking for someone to just like tell them what they think.
Right, exactly.
Whether they agree with it or not.
And like, I guess it's that authenticity, right? Like if you believe what you're saying, then you're going to be authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's kind of what they're doing.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm curious for you, like, have you noticed any changes in your own podcast listening habits? Like, in terms of like what you gravitate towards now?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have. I think I've noticed that I'm listening to more politically driven podcasts.
Okay.
And I think that maybe speaks to like a larger desire for like deeper analysis,
Yeah, more in-depth content.
Yeah.
Instead of just like the headlines.
Exactly. People want to go beyond the headlines. They want to understand the nuance. They want to like really dig into these issues,
Right.
And I think that podcasts are like kind of the perfect medium for that.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. Like it's almost like, podcasts are kind of becoming the new like town square,
It's true. It's like, it's where people are gonna
to hash it out.
Yeah, to hash it out, to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting. Okay, so like putting it all together.
Yeah.
It seems like, this MeidasTouch success, right?
Yeah.
It seems to signal that there's this growing appetite for politically charged content, especially from like a more progressive perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a sign that, the podcast landscape is changing.
Yeah.
And that, maybe this is the beginning of like a new era.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's super interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it raises some important questions about like how these podcasts might be shaping like the larger political landscape.
Right. Like, are they just reflecting existing views, or are they actually influencing opinion?
Exactly. Like, are they going to start mobilizing listeners? Are they going to, are they going to be like a force for?
Right. And how are they going to be used by political figures?
Exactly. Yeah. Moving forward.
Okay. So deep divers, I want you to think about this. All right. Could this be a sign, this whole MeidasTouch thing, could this be a sign of like a larger trend of these politically driven podcasts gaining traction? Yeah. And if so, like, what does that mean for the future of political discourse?
Yeah, it's a fascinating development, and I think it's one that we all need to be paying attention to. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in, Deep Divers. This is a really interesting one.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made up. Strut down the hall, won't stop till I get